Good morning, dear listeners and friends of Radio Maria, Kenya, Nairobi. This is the message of the month of November with Bishop Rodriguez Mejia. He is teaching us on the Beatitudes. Just in case you have any question, point of concern, or clarification, kindly get in touch with us through our SMS code, which is free of charge, 23405, our WhatsApp number 0740-566-552, and our studio line 0110-002-009. Radio Maria Kenya, Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home.
Good morning, listeners of Radio Maria. I am Bishop Rodrigo Mejia, born in Medellin, Colombia, South America, but working practically all my life here in Africa, first in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I arrived in 1964, up to 1984. Then they missioned me here to Kenya to teach in the University College of Hekima University College, and the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Then after they missioned me to go to Ethiopia, and it was there in Ethiopia that they made me a bishop in 2007, and I was there in the Apostolic Vicariate of Sodo until I reached the canonical age of 75, where bishops are supposed to resign. And I resigned, and once my successor was in place, I came back here again to Kenya, to Nairobi, where I had been before. I am very glad to accept this invitation of Radio Maria to share with you not only my knowledge in theology, but also my experience of living, trying to live the spirit of the gospel as every Christian. And particularly in these monthly meetings, I will consecrate each meeting every month on one beatitude. So those who are interested, as the introduction was said, they may have questions. They may address the questions through SMS to the Radio Maria. I want now to start with a short prayer that is just a verse taken from Psalm 62. The first beatitude being, "Happy are the poor in spirit." This prayer is a typical short prayer which indicates the attitude of a poor in spirit. My Lord, my soul rests in you alone, from whom comes my salvation. God alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall never fall. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Let us ask a very obvious question at the very beginning. Why have I chosen the topic of the Beatitudes? The topic of the Beatitudes is in Matthew, in the Gospel according to Matthew, in chapter 5, verses 1 to 13. There are only 12, 13 verses, but they are the beginning of a very long discourse of Jesus, which is known as the Sermon on the Mountain. This Sermon on the Mountain occupies 3 full chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, 6, and 7, which is already giving us a message about the importance of the teachings of Jesus in this sermon. In fact, Matthew in his Gospel is writing for his community, a kind of a small Christian community in Jerusalem, composed of Jewish people, Hebrew people, all of them, inhabitants of Jerusalem, converted to Christianity. So they are new Christians born in Jewish culture. And in order to show to them the continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament, making by this way easier for them to accept the newness of the gospel as rooted in the Old Testament, he compared in his gospel Jesus and Moses. And he treats Jesus as the new Moses. As Moses gave the law of the people of Israel on the Mount Sinai, Jesus in the new Israel, in the new covenant, is giving us the new law, the new testament on the Mount of the Beatitudes. That is why it is called the Sermon on the Mountain. That is the main reason, the importance of these Beatitudes, because in this introduction there is the summary of all the rest of these 3 chapters. The second reason is that these Beatitudes respond to a need that is a human fundamental need of all times, in the time of Jesus, as it is in our time, is the looking for happiness. Every human being is looking for happiness. There is no human being on earth, of whatever people, culture, language, or nation, that is not looking for happiness. Any human normal being wants to be happy in this life. Nobody accepts unhappiness very easily. We tolerate, we bear with it, but it is not our purpose. And that is why the Beatitudes are an invitation for happiness. In the English versions that you may have at home, instead of saying, "Happy the poor in spirit," you may read, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That is a question of English translation. I prefer the original word written by Matthew that was really happy. In Greek, the gospel was written originally in Greek, and that was the word that Matthew used for the beginning of each beatitude. This is important to retain for all our meetings, that here we are talking about happiness. But happiness is a very wide notion. Happiness may be of many different kinds, different levels. A small boy, a small child, may be happy with a sweet, and he doesn't look for more. If he's crying and the mother gives him a sweet, the baby stops crying and is satisfied. For him, this is happiness. I would say a cheap happiness. It's not very expensive. But the more we grow, the more expensive our desire for happiness becomes. If the same boy is sad, depressed, let's say at the age of 15, 16 years old, and you find him sad, please don't give him a sweet, because this is not what makes that boy happy. He is looking maybe for something more important. He is, because his father does not want to give him an iPhone or a bicycle or something else that makes him happy. Happiness grows with us. The more we grow, the more difficult is the desire of happiness. And I remember that when my mother, I am the last born of 11 children, and on a Mother's Day, my elder sister asked her mom, we want to give you a good gift, something that makes you happy. We know that you have everything in the house, you don't need anything for the moment. We want to give you something, not something that you need, but something that makes you happy. Tell us, and we are ready to put together all your children, even if it is expensive, and we give you a good gift. My mother replied without hesitation, if you want me really become happy and be happy, please remain united, remain in fraternity, don't quarrel among yourselves, communicate and be one. That is my real happiness. For a mother, the unity and the union of the family is what makes the parents happy. And sometimes these gifts is more expensive. You will not find it in the supermarkets of Nairobi, but it is something that is a grace of God. Therefore, the happiness we are talking about here is a deep happiness, is a total happiness, is a spiritual happiness. It's not a superficial and provisional happiness. That is valid introduction for all the Beatitudes that we will see. So I greet all the people, all the Christians, all the people who are listening to us in Nairobi, in the Archdiocese of Nairobi, many other parts of Kenya, to Radio Maria, and I start developing the first Beatitude. Happy are the poor in spirit. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. The Beatitudes have always two parts. First, a description. Second, a promise. Here the description is, happy are the poor in spirit. The promise is, second part, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Let us go to the first part. Who are the poor in spirit? What is the meaning of that expression? In the Gospel of Luke, we find also some Beatitudes, not as well developed as in Matthew, but he also says, happy the poor, the kingdom of God is theirs. But he says simply, happy the poor, not the poor in spirit. Why this distinction? Because poverty is a word that is very rich in meaning. You may be poor materially, you may be poor in food, you may be poor in health, you have a poor health. You may be poor intellectually, you may be poor psychologically by a handicap, by timidity, shyness, or other complex. So this notion comprises many things, and it is good to identify what kind of poverty are we talking about here. Matthew puts a qualification, in spirit. In the Bible, poverty, as we consider today a sociological poverty of destitution, scarcity, lack of means, lack of house, lack of proper food, etc., is not a blessing, is never a blessing, is either sometimes interpreted as a punishment or is because of the sins of the people. Later on, there is a progress, and poverty is seen like the consequences of the lack of faithfulness of Israel. For example, during the exile, they go into the exile, the whole people made poor. We are not talking about destitution. We are not talking about poverty. On the contrary, the commitment for the poor, the best commitment is to struggle against poverty, this kind of social, financial poverty. Here is not a matter of finance, it's not a matter of economy. By saying in spirit, Matthew means that the poor in spirit is the one who puts his security, his hope, his faith, his confidence or her confidence in God alone, and not in money, not in power, not in influences, not in human means, in science or in technology, but only in God. That is the real poor in spirit. And that is why I started this talk with the short prayer of Psalm 62. I recommend the reading of this psalm because there the poor in spirit is described. My soul rests in God alone, from whom comes my salvation. God alone is my rock and my salvation. So, Christianity is not an insurance company promising lack of risks, lack of problems. No. On the contrary, we will see in the last Beatitude that Jesus is very realistic and will alert us about persecutions. But the gospel is telling us that there is a qualitative happiness in putting our hope in God alone. The model, easy to understand, of poor in spirit in the gospel is Mary, Mary of Nazareth. Not because she was really very poor, destitute. She was normal, a lady, a girl living in Nazareth, but having a decent house and food every day. She was not a beggar, but she put all her confidence in God when the angel announced her the risk of becoming the mother of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. She could not understand. She was not an intellectual. She had not higher education. She was a countryside girl in great simplicity. But she replied, "Be done to me according to your word." That is, I put my confidence in you. God will provide. Poverty is exemplified also in Abraham. In Abraham, when God tested him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And of course, Abraham, as any father, is naturally, humanly attached to his son. But the poor prefers God over any other thing, and if God requests the son, Abraham is ready to sacrifice him. When Isaac asks him, "Where is the victim?" Abraham replies, a response that is typical of the poor in spirit: God will provide. God will provide. And we know that God provided, and Isaac was not killed, was not sacrificed. So this poverty in spirit is an interior freedom, a lack of attachment or disordered attachment to material things, not only money, but it may be an occupation, maybe a person, maybe a place where we live. And sometimes we have to change, and it's difficult to get detached of that place, of that society. To be poor in spirit is to be available in the face of God, to be ready to accept his will, whatever it is. Jesus himself was poor, not because he was poorer than other inhabitants of Nazareth, but because he gave his own life. And his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane before his passion is the prayer of a poor. Father, if it is possible, take away from me this suffering of the passion and the cross. But not my will, but your will be done. The poor trusts in the will of God, is focused, is oriented, is concentrated on one thing on this life, to do the will of God. All the rest comes after. We understand this notion by understanding perhaps the opposite of poverty in spirit. It's another attitude, totally opposed. Is to put our confidence in ourselves, in our intelligence, in our capacities, in our means, in our money, in our influence, in our prestige, in our intelligence. And the rich is full of himself. The rich is self-satisfied. The rich, like in the gospel, the parable of the rich of Luke, who had a great harvest, said, I will enlarge my deposit of grain, and I will tell to my soul, rest the whole of your life. Now you can enjoy life because you are sure that you have enough food and enough riches until the end of your life. And in the parable, Jesus added, fool, you may be asked your life even tonight. So, this richness is totally opposed to the poverty in the spirit. And it's not a riches of money, it's riches of selfishness, riches of self-esteem, richness of pride. Like the Pharisee that comes to the temple to pray. Even in prayer we may be rich in front of God and not poor in spirit. Lord, I give you thanks because I am not like the rest of human beings. I go to the synagogue every Sabbath. I fast twice a week. I pay all the taxes. I'll fulfill the law. I am not like that tax collector behind me who doesn't know the law of Moses. This prayer, Jesus said, was not exhausted. He did not go back home justified. Instead, the one who was at the bottom, at the back of the church, was saying, Lord, have mercy on me, I am a poor sinner. The poor is humble, the poor cries to God. In Psalm 69, there is a verse that we like very much because it becomes a nice song. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. And sometimes one person asked me a question. So, Bishop, the God does not hear the cry of the rich. That is discrimination. That is class struggle. That is communism. I replied, no. God cannot listen the cry of the rich for one fundamental reason. Because the rich, according to the Bible, is the one who never cries to God. And if he doesn't cry, his cries cannot be heard. So, to be self-sufficient, not to need God in your life, is the total richness according to the Bible and is the total opposition to the poor in spirit. Such is the notion of poverty in spirit. Now, what about the poor, that they're really poor? Are not they included here? Of course they are. Every person that puts the hope in God is poor in spirit, independently of the bank account or the lack of bank account. But it is clear, according to the Gospel of Luke, that Jesus showed showed a very important, very clear preferential love for the suffering, the sick, the lepers, the blind, the paralytics, all those who were poor. The poor are blessed not because they are good necessarily, but because they are suffering, like Lazarus that was suffering at the door of the rich, and the rich was not taking care of him. And God, through Abraham, rewarded him. God has mercy on those who suffer. This is another kind of blessing. The two Beatitudes are not contradictory in Luke and Matthew, they are complementary. But Matthew wanted to specify poor in spirit. And in the language of Matthew, the Hebrew, his mother tongue, this is done with one word alone, anawim. The anawim in Hebrew means the poor in spirit. In Greek, Matthew did not have an equivalent word and has to put this expression, poor in spirit. It's important to approach this beatitude with good understanding. It's not creating a class division. Any person, independently of his richness, material or not, can be poor in spirit. It's an attitude of the heart. It's an attitude of the spirit. Money, says Pope Francis in one of his audiences, money is a good servant, but is a bad boss, which means nobody can serve two lords, money and God. We serve only one God. And even our money is an instrument to serve God, to develop our talents, to work, and for the good of others. Money is necessary in life, it's true, but it's not the purpose. It's not giving the security in our life. With money we can purchase medical care, but not health. Health is a gift from God. Such is the attitude, interior attitude. Now, this is the first part of the Beatitude. We can have a small break here.